Welcome to the Titans of Industry show. I'm here today with Alasdair Macleod of Goldmoney. I've got a great interview for you. We're going to talk a lot about first of all, about Goldmoney, which is an amazing company to understand. And the reason it's a great company to understand is you can really learn the demand for gold through understanding the ebbs and flows of Goldmoney business. And we'll talk to Alasdair Macleod about that. We'll also talk about the disadvantage of Bitcoin and the advantages of Bitcoin. We'll compare this time in history to a lot of other debt cycles that we've seen. And we'll talk about the Sharia gold laws changing in the Muslim world and their effect on demand. Plus, Alasdair's got a lot of great information about the potential solutions to this fiat monetary system and how he thinks this will dissolve and evolve into a new currency system. And, Alasdair, how are you today, first of all?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me on, Leo.
Look, I want to start with the fact that you've got an immense background and experience in the sound money world. You're basically an expert on sound money first, and then an expert on gold second. Could you talk about the company called Goldmoney, what it does, and so people will have a better understanding of the service you provide? And then let's talk about the fact that it's a great vehicle and tool as a backdoor, as a behind the scenes to the gold industry.
Certainly. Basically, Goldmoney provides the facility for ordinary people to escape from unsound money. Unsound money basically being fiat currencies, which can be expanded either by the central bank or by the commercial banks through the expansion of bank credit at will. And unsound money loses its purchasing power over time, and it loses it actually very, very dramatically, more than will be indicated by an examination of the consumer price index. So sound money is important, and from time to time, people will get more worried about the prospects for their paper currency than at other times. And I would suggest that with a rapid expansion of money supply in all the major jurisdictions since the financial crisis in 2008-9, that this is such a time. And we find that a lot of people are trying to protect their savings by owning gold, owning at least some gold, so that if the worst happens, then they have actually got something which is not tied either in paper currencies or tied up in the banking system, because the ownership of physical gold on deposit, not on deposit, but physical gold held in a vault of our customer's choice. And it's their gold, not ours. We just merely act as custodians of it. They have no counterparty risk, and that's a very, very important thing. If you have your money in a bank, you have counterparty risk, and that is something which obviously at times of monetary instability is a dangerous thing to do. So a lot of our customers, both on the wealth side and also on the transaction side, like to have that feeling, if you like, of security, a little bit of security in very, very uncertain times. And that's basically the service that we provide.
Sure. So I want to get our listeners' heads around this. Basically, if you have savings and you want to allocate some of those savings into gold bullion without having to deal with the hassle of selling it and buying it, etc., you can upload it into a MasterCard, spend the fiat currencies, and basically you take care of the selling of the gold, and you still have whatever you didn't spend at the vault. So it's just a way of getting your gold onto fiat currency much easier and on a timely basis, so it doesn't disrupt your life logistically.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, what we will give you on the transaction side is we will give you free storage up to 1 kilo's worth of gold, and we also pay the insurance, because obviously vaulted gold has to be insured. So we cover all that side. We merely charge a 0.5% commission going in and coming out, which actually is virtually nothing. So what you would do is, typically you might say have a couple of 100 grams of gold in your account, and then you would draw down on that as you want to spend it. And we can offer you a MasterCard in a number of the major currencies. So in my case, for example, because I live in England, I have a sterling MasterCard, and I just preload it as I go along. So, this week I sort of think, well, I'm likely to be spending £500 on a number of things, so I just download £500. It can be done on an app on my mobile phone, and it's just literally loaded just like that. I can do it in the shop. If I see something I want to buy and I say, well, that's going to cost me £500, and I've only got less than that preloaded onto the card, I can just do it on my mobile phone via an app, and then it just works just like that. It's actually a very, very slick and smart service.
Beautiful. I want to ask you about this new aspect of your business. Excuse me, the Sharia gold law in the Muslim countries. How is this going to affect gold demand worldwide, and what has Goldmoney basically done to adjust to this?
Well, we were working on this with the World Gold Council. The World Gold Council developed an initiative to make various gold products Sharia compliant. And so in discussion with the various scholars and all the rest of it, they have come up, if you like, with the basic characteristics that are required. But you still have to go through the process of becoming Sharia compliant, and they will audit your systems to see that you do actually comply with Sharia law. Now, we're one of, I think, 4 or 5 providers of gold services that have actually managed to achieve that. Now, what we're looking at is a total market of about 1.8 billion people who are rapidly becoming more wealthy, because the wealth in the world today is being accumulated in Asia more than anywhere else. I'm afraid to say that the welfare-driven states are basically killing people with taxes. That's not where the new wealth is being generated. It tends to be being generated in Asia, and the Islamic community are major beneficiaries of that. So this, we think, is in time going to be really quite important. The other thing about it is that the Muslim world are quite naturally attuned to using gold as money. I mean, for example, I was in Indonesia earlier this year, and speaking to people there, it's quite obvious that they use the paper currency for day-to-day transactions. But if you want to do anything which is, let's say, a capital project, let's say you want to open a new shop or do something like that, then the way you finance it is you take your gold to a pawn shop. They've got a network of pawn shops in Jakarta and elsewhere in Indonesia. And that is the way you finance your capital expenditure. And once you have managed to sort of earn enough money to release your gold, you get it back. The Indian farmers do exactly the same. Now, the Indians are obviously, they're Hindu rather than Muslim, but you can see that you have this sort of way of life throughout Asia where gold is actually central to the capital spending side of life. And indeed, when it comes to doing Hajj pilgrimages, we have a similar problem, because to do a Hajj pilgrimage, it takes, in dollar terms, something like $8,000 to $10,000 of savings for a pilgrim to actually embark on a Hajj trip, and consequently, this is a very, very expensive and major deal for so many people. So they need to save over a long period of time. And as devout Muslims, it's obviously important to them that their savings are Sharia compliant. And so this is, if you like, something that we think is going to build in the future and probably build, very substantially, I would think. But it's a 5 to 10 year program, I think, rather than something that's instant.
Interesting. Alasdair, I want to talk about the comparison that's being done today between cryptocurrencies and gold and silver as money. Both are now perceived by many as safe havens, and basically two alternatives of safe havens to fiat currencies that are denominated in by the central banks. Do you agree with that, or what do you see as the difference between gold and silver as money and cryptocurrencies as a safe haven, and where do you see the difference down the road in 5-10 years?
Okay, well, the first thing to note is that gold and silver have always been money. They haven't necessarily been in circulation as money, but they have always been money, and so far as we can tell, the future will always remain money. Cryptocurrencies are a far newer innovation, obviously. I mean, things like Bitcoin have been going for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. Now, the problem that a Bitcoin has compared with gold and silver is it doesn't have that long track history of millennia of being accepted as money. So, in a sense, it is bound to be more transient than gold and silver. I see two other disadvantages for the cryptocurrencies. One is volatility. The point about money, if you're going to have money, you want money to be the constant thing in a transaction. So that, if you're going to go and buy a restaurant meal or something like that, you've got to know when you book your restaurant and you're going to go out there, let's say next week, you've got to know that the money that you're going to pay for your meal with is going to have a relatively steady value, so that it's the difference in the price, if you like, measured in your currency today compared with tomorrow or next week, is actually very, very minimal. You cannot say this with a Bitcoin. It is really too volatile. The other problem I think that we need to recognize with cryptocurrencies is that they are not universally accepted by governments. This is important because governments have put in, know your customer and anti-money laundering regulations and all the rest of it. Cryptocurrencies effectively are a way of avoiding the provision of that sort of information. And the whole of the blockchain system, as I understand it, with Bitcoin, basically means the only two people who know who is in a transaction is the buyer and the seller. The information from there is not available to anyone else. So as far as the authorities are concerned, they think this is proceeds of crime. They think this is money laundering. They think this is tax evasion and all the things the state doesn't like. And the result is that I think anyone who invests a lot of time and energy in developing cryptocurrencies for use as a currency, they face the risk that actually government is gunning for them all the time. And that, I think, is a real problem. So I would say there are three differences. There's the fact that gold and silver are properly established and have been for millennia. Cryptocurrencies are relatively new. I think there's the volatility story, and there's also the acceptability by governments.
Interesting. I know that a lot of people that do buy cryptocurrencies do it with very, very minimal amounts of their net worth, obviously, because of the fact that it's new, the fact that it's very volatile, etc. So it's a good point that you're raising. Do you want to go through with us on a few of these scenarios and the potential solutions you see for this ending debt cycle that we're experiencing in the Western world? Most governments are bankrupt. They're deficit spending for a few decades. The US government, who is the largest in the world, is also the biggest debtor. Where is this going from here? And what are the possible solutions? Can you compare this to any time in history?
There have been comparisons throughout history, but the comparisons have been very individual. I mean, for example, there was the collapse of the Reichsmark in between 1921 and 1923. That was specific to that currency. There were also other currencies in Europe in the wake of the First World War which collapsed. For example, the Austrian currency collapsed, and I think I'm right in saying that the Russian currency collapsed at some stage through that revolutionary process. So we have seen currencies collapse before. The first paper currency really to collapse in, if you like, sort of reasonable timescale was in France at the time of the Revolution. You had assignat and mandat, which were two currencies effectively, which followed one after the other, meant to be secured on church property. Certainly the assignat was secured on that, but they became valueless because as a source of money for initially the kings of France, the Louis of France, it was just too attractive. As far as Parliament was concerned after that, it was too attractive. They couldn't stop printing the stuff and debasing it. So we have seen this before, but not in a situation where the world's reserve currency, which in the past was always gold, but is now the dollar, that itself is in great danger of ultimate collapse. You've only got to look at the way in which the amount of currency in circulation has expanded over the years, and particularly accelerated since the great financial crisis, to know that this is a huge, huge danger. Now, at some stage, you will find that all this currency that's hanging around is going to begin to fuel price inflation. And I think we are already seeing the beginning of this in the sense that you have commodity prices rising because China is effectively cornering the world market in key commodities such as copper, iron ore, energy, particularly oil, with all the deals that she's been doing with Russia, with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, and I mean even talking oil with in Alaska. That was President Xi yesterday. So this cornering of commodities is beginning to drive up these commodity prices, and the result of that is that inflation at the CPI level is actually beginning to rise and exceed the targets set by the central banks. Now, the problem then is if the central banks start raising interest rates with the amount of debt there is around, it immediately throws many debtors into a debt trap, by which I mean they find they cannot afford to, if you like, replace their debt with new debt. They can't afford the new interest rates, the new higher interest rates, and their businesses go into a state of collapse. The same is also true of governments. If you can imagine the situation in Italy. At the moment, its Italian bonds have been held at a very, very high level by ECB buying. Now, if the ECB starts tapering, which it said it would do from April, not that there's been any evidence of that yet, then you can see that the buying of Italian bonds is going to diminish. The yield that the government has to pay to roll over its debt starts increasing, and consequently, it's a very short period of time before the Italian government gets itself into a debt trap from which there is no escape. So this is where we are now. How we get out of it is very, very difficult to see. I can come up with an economic plan for the politicians and say this is how you get out of it, but the problem is that no politician has a mandate to pursue the sort of strictures that I would say are required in order for a government to get its finances straight. So it's actually not so much an economic problem, it's a political problem.
Just to get this straight, what you're basically saying is that this is no different than any other problem that people face, where they know they're heading towards a storm, but it is very hard for them to admit that. And so unless they get struck first, they won't change course.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. Basically, I would sum it up and say that the way in which this will be resolved is you have a crisis first, and then you have a solution. Now, the last time we had a crisis was the great financial crisis, when Lehman Brothers went under and, all that stuff suddenly undermined the whole of the world's banking system. And how did they resolve the crisis? Well, the Fed stood there and effectively wrote an open check, which totaled roughly $13 trillion of support for the banking system. They took out the whole of the U.S. mortgage market, just bought it, and all that bad stuff is now on the Fed's balance sheet. So it's hidden, if you like, from the banking system. The confidence then went back into the banks. The problem is that this time round, you write an open check. Having written an open check last time, you've got to think about what is going to be the consequences for the purchasing power of the currency in which you're writing your open check on. And that, I think, is the big unknown that we all face today. We do have this huge danger of a collapse in the purchasing power of paper currencies, and nobody quite knows how to resolve it. And I think that the resolution in this, as I say, is crisis first, solution second. It's got to be that way. And this is what happened in Germany back in the 1920s. Basically what happened was that as the currency collapsed, at the final stage of the collapse, they managed to steady the situation and issue new marks. There was some sort of fairy tale that it was guaranteed on all the assets of the German nation, whatever. It didn't matter. The point is that there was a public willingness to accept the new currency, because you really do need to believe that the currency is useful, because you cannot convert your labor into what you want to purchase. This is the whole point of the division of labor. We go and we make money like we're a shopkeeper, or we're making an engineering product or something like that. But we don't keep that for ourselves. We sell it in order to buy the things we need in order to live, to enjoy life, to have the things we want. And money is absolutely central to that process. You cannot run a modern life on barter. Money is so important. The value of money going up and down actually doesn't matter too much in that sense. It matters when it comes to savings, but that's a different story. But the one thing that you do need is you must have money. So even if we have a complete financial crisis in the lines of Germany in 1920 to 1923, there is still that desire in everybody that something will work. And I think that we probably will. The only solution I can see to this is that you get a collapse of the current monetary system, but something else will replace it. And the goodwill of the public will ensure that it works, at least for a time.
Understood. Look, I want to wrap this interview with one final question to you. And this is regarding Goldmoney. I want to understand the amount of people that own an account with Goldmoney. Are you seeing an influx of new clients, or is this a steady growth business? The reason I'm asking this is because I want to figure out and understand if gold is in a bubble. Can you compare this to 2011 or 2007, 2008? Are you seeing the types of fear levels that drove people before to buy gold, or are you seeing more of a quiet period? And with regards to that, can you talk about the history of Goldmoney as a predictor of rising gold prices?
Well, if we're talking about comparisons with 2011, this was before before the transaction side actually existed. So we've really can only compare today with that time on the wealth side, which was the original gold, silver, and platinum group metals storage business, which was established by James Turk back in about 2002. Now, my memory of 2011 was that, yes, there was an awful lot of interest, and I would say that a lot of the interest was essentially speculative. There were, people who understood gold, who could see the dangers, various dangers arising. I mean, for example, it wasn't very long after that that we had the Cyprus bail-in, and there were all sorts of problems surrounding that. And we saw why the gold price was driven down. It was a concerted action by large players in the market with the support of central banks. So, things have been up and down. Compared with that today, I would say that sort of speculative interest is very, very low. But what has happened is that it is being, I think, replaced, and it's beginning to build by people who are trying to escape the new fears of today. There is a huge amount of capital flight going on within the Eurozone. And we see this in the balances on the settlement system, which is the Target 2 settlement system between the national central banks and the ECB. The imbalances have now built to over €1 trillion. Now, that is a huge, huge quantity. And consequently, some of the smarter money is beginning to think, well, hold on a minute, there's not much point in moving our deposits, say, from a bank in Italy to a bank in Germany, when the banks in Germany have probably got the same sort of problems, maybe not quite on the same scale, as some of the banks in Italy. Wouldn't it be better actually to have our money in gold? So we are seeing that there is this sort of interest beginning to develop in Europe. And this is reflected, actually, you don't need to look at what happens in Goldmoney, but if you look at what happens with some of the larger physically backed ETFs, that gives you a pretty good handle on where the interest is coming from and the state of that interest. And that certainly confirms what I've just said from the Goldmoney point of view. You have seen the holdings of GLD, for example, the big physical ETF, that's been rising quite significantly over the last year or 15 months or so.
Sure. So I want to make sure that people understand what you're getting at, and it's important to summarize this. The important thing to understand is that gold is a store of value and not an investment vehicle to get rich. Because of the fiat monetary system, the price of gold has risen from $35 per ounce in 1971 all the way to $800 in 1980, $850, then went down all the way to the bottom in the year 2000 at around $200, $250 and dollars per ounce, and has been rising ever since until 2011 for 11 years straight, then down 5 years until 2015, and now it's up again. And it's important to understand that this is a unique phenomenon in history for gold, who used to have a fixed price in a currency that was backed by it. Since all currencies now float against it, its price in that currencies as a whole rises and falls, but the value of the gold as a purchasing power stays roughly the same. It increases a bit over time, as a study by Jeremy Siegel showed. Since 1810 until 2012, it has risen fourfold. So basically, any gold ounce held in 1810 is now basically buying 4 times what it did back then. But it's nothing to compare with cash producing assets. So it's very important to understand that gold is not a speculative vehicle to get rich from. If you're looking to do that, it's much more prudent to catch a rising gold stocks or gold or silver stocks bull market than to try to speculate with the gold price itself. It's merely a metal that is used as money. Am I being correct when I say all this?
I think you've actually summed it up very well, Leo. The only thing I would add is that gold and silver have always been money throughout history. That is its primary purpose, if you like, in the commercial world. It is backed, if you like, by its use, its other use, and that is as jewelry, as something of value in art. I mean, the amazing thing is that if you go to the museum in Cairo, for example, you can see the mask of Tutankhamun. Now that is, I think I'm right in saying, it's roughly 3,000 years old, and it is amazing. It looks like new. I mean, the gold and the enameling on it is just absolutely incredible, and that is the durability of gold. That's the important thing, and the fact that it can be used for something which is which is aesthetically so pleasing. Whether it's jewelry or an item of status, for example. Regalia for a king or a queen. This is something which has that fundamental underlying value, and as a result, it is absolutely perfectly cast to be used as money. And this, going back to what we were saying about the difference between gold and silver and the cryptocurrencies, this is something that cryptocurrencies just cannot replicate. It's that basic value. And another thing I would add is that the stability of commodity prices measured in gold is considerably greater than the stability of commodity prices measured in paper currencies. That is something which is well worth bearing in mind.
Alasdair Macleod, how can people reach out and know more about Goldmoney and your various services?
Goldmoney.com, and you'll find that there are links there to the transaction side, which actually we call personal, which would be like the sort of a personal bank account, as it were. Not that we're a bank, and it's I'm just sort of making a comparison. But that is the transaction side, and then there is the wealth side. And the research I write is actually on the wealth side. So if you click on wealth, you'll find there is another menu which takes you into research, and you can then read what we're writing about. And we've got, I think, quite a high-powered team now on the research side, and we have ambitions to really be the leading researchers on sound money and gold-related matters.
Alasdair Macleod, thank you very much. This was a very important interview.
Very much my pleasure, Leo. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us today, and I'd like to take a moment just to, recap what we've heard today from Alasdair. There's an important theme running through the gold sector today. As this interview is being posted, gold is at a 200-day moving average. It's playing with it. If it breaks to the upside, it will be amazing. But it's also at a 200-week moving average, dating back all the way to 2011, and that could send gold, if it breaks just 8 or 9% higher from here, it can really move towards the $1,500 per ounce. And it's not only the debt cycle that is occurring with all Western governments today, it's also the negative interest rates worldwide that's affecting the price. That's one of the reasons why the richest man in mainland China, Li Keqiang, one of the most influential people alive today, is looking for ways to own gold mines that will supply him directly with the gold. Obviously, he's 88 years old. He's built a fortune, over $30 billion net worth, starting from nothing, from a factory of plastic flowers, to becoming one of the biggest business empires in the world. And now he wants to make sure that he lives his money to prosperity, and he wants directly to get gold mines to deliver him the bullion. He basically wants to accumulate gold and is willing to finance it. What drives gold prices? What drives people to hoard gold? What's the value of this metal in the open market? Gold is a commercial, has a commercial price attached to it because of its utility as a jewelry, as an electrical component for computers, and as a connector for many semiconductors. But its traditional role and main purpose throughout time is money. And during the times of the central banks, especially from 1971 onwards, it has proved itself as a mean of protecting savings and protecting purchasing power. You can't compare it to stocks or to real estate or to cash producing assets. You need to compare it to other currencies. And the fact is, it's a much better preserver of capital. Now, what I'd like to cover briefly are the gold and silver mining companies, the juniors. And for that matter, it's important to understand that since owning a small position in a number of them, when prices are depressed, when valuations are available for you, can be such a lucrative idea. We released the most comprehensive playbook for the juniors in 2 volumes, part 1, part 2. And it's paramount to become immersed in it. You'll become a far better trader instantly. Go to wealthresearchgroup.com/gold playbook and download our special reports. These exclusive reports will help you to become a better discerner of information and to put stocks through the ringer of your due diligence period. There are thousands of mining companies, but only a select few of them ever make it and ever are worth the risk that you take to get the reward. So this will help you a lot. Thank you for joining the show today, and we'll have much more from the gold and silver sector and from commodities and resources in the coming weeks.